have an unidentified flying object.
Back by popular demand, one of the most requested speakers and lecturers, and a true revolutionary and pioneer in ufology, the one and only Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, it's a pleasure to have you back on.
Great to be with you.
It's amazing because every time I speak to you, we learn something new. Now, there's several things I want to talk to you about, but before, literally just a couple of minutes before we connected, someone literally wrote a question, and I was hoping we can direct that question to you from the listener. I'm going to read it word for word. This is from Renee in Tucson. Dr. Greer, have you given up on government as a source of official disclosure?
That's a great question, actually, and there's a big backstory. We'd probably talk for the whole hour to get her informed as to what the background really is to that. And here's what I mean by it. I've been doing this for about 25 years, and between 1992 and 2001, when we launched the global disclosure movement at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., I had spent an unbelievable amount of time briefing the most senior people in the United States, Europe, all over the world, in government, members of Congress, and what have you. And what we were asking for in the early days, now you have to take this in perspective. I'm working full-time as a trauma doctor, emergency doctor. I have 4 little kids. I'm shuttling back and forth from North Carolina up to Washington, doing briefings for the CIA director, for the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, etc. So in the early days, what I was wanting to do, and this is also how Lawrence Rockefeller got involved when he realized what we were up to, was to put together the best available evidence we could, and for me to find firsthand government witnesses, astronauts, cosmonauts, CIA people, KGB people, and put them together and get their information and get their documents and get the evidence for the fact that we're not alone in the cosmos, we're being visited, and that there are very secret projects mishandling it. And that the hope was, during the transition from Papa Bush, George W.'s dad, who had been head of the CIA back in the 70s, and Bill Clinton, who became president in 1993, January of 93, during that period, there was some thought that there might be an opening, and particularly because the Cold War had just ended, that they could put a fig leaf on the secrecy about UFOs, blaming it on the exigencies of the Cold War, even though that was never the reason, and come out and come clean and end the cover-up and all of that. Well, actually, President Clinton was very open to that concept, and certainly his CIA director, R. James Woolsey, was, as were many other people. But the problem became with someone actually wanting to take the steps to do it. So I spent personally an enormous amount of time putting together this initiative. As you know from the Associated Press, AP sued the Clinton Library and got the original Project Starlight documents, which was the name of this operation prior to the Disclosure Project, which I founded in the year 2000. The Project Starlight documents, there was one that was a letter signed by me and astronaut Edgar Mitchell and cosmonaut Marina Popovich and all kinds of people, basically recommending that the president take this seriously and change it. Of course, and Lawrence Rockefeller was very supportive of this. Now, I think his brother David Rockefeller of Chase Manhattan Bank was less amused, but Lawrence was the philosopher of the family and very, very favorable to this. But he was getting a lot of flack from his nephew, who was Jay Rockefeller, who was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and other people in sort of the mainline world of secrecy. So Lawrence, however, really was a white hat in this, or wanted to be, but he didn't want to push too far. So we took the lead. Basically, I took the lead in providing the briefings and putting together the evidence and the people. And we thought if we put the best evidence together and provide compelling reasons why the president and his national security team, as well as key people in the Congress, should get behind ending the secrecy and bringing this information out and the technology and with all of that, that perhaps they would do it. Well, the problem is, having been basically doing this for multiple presidencies, what I have concluded is that the political class are in two big problems. The biggest one is that they actually don't have access control over these projects. Now, what do I mean by that? Just because you've been briefed on them doesn't mean you control them. Don't conflate those two things. Those are very different things. And what I discovered, to my absolute shock and horror, was that the President of the United States, as well as his CIA director, as well as the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee I personally met with, like Senator Dick Bryan from Nevada, where Area 51 is, none of them knew anything. And when they asked, they were basically lied to. In fact, Senator Claiborne Pell, who was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which when I met with him, ironically, I said, Senator, you have been deprived of dealing with the ultimate foreign relations issue. And I pointed to the stars above our head. We were out on a patio in California. And he looked at me and he said, Doctor, I believe you're right. I said, yeah, I am. But he also told me that he had made inquiries through official channels and never gotten any answers. But none of these people felt that it was bogus or that there wasn't something going on, but that it was just an ultra-black project, what we later came to know as an unacknowledged special access project that is not acknowledged to anyone who's not in that compartmented operation. So the problem became, okay, they're interested, they're kind of supportive, but as the CIA director said to me, how do we disclose that which we don't have access to? You get it? So the problem would become, if it was done that way, it would create the largest, most severe constitutional crisis since 1776, and I am not overstating that. So the politicians really don't want to touch that third rail and get electrocuted. Now you have to add on another part of this. And that is that the media, the big mainstream media, not you guys, are completely corrupted by interest in the corporate intelligence sector to ridicule this subject or to whitewash it or to, they'll get someone from a trailer park with all their teeth missing to, say they saw something, but they won't let someone who's a general or a cosmonaut on the air or an astronaut. So what you find is that the big media are poised to attack like a pack of hyenas, crunching on the bones of any politician or public figure that would dare even mention the word UFO or extraterrestrial intelligence and make them a laughingstock. So then you have to add that whole problem into this. The bottom line is, it's not that I have given up that these officials in government should do it. I am extremely skeptical that they will. And that's why, after we notified every significant agency in the U.S. government that we were going to come forward with people who had top secret clearances who had been part of these projects and had firsthand information, that those folks would do so legally without any penalty because the projects that were being disclosed were themselves illegal operations, and the National Security Act didn't apply, and they couldn't prosecute them. And to this date, none of them have been threatened or prosecuted. Very different, say, from Edward Snowden, who disclosed projects which, even though they were horrible, those projects were being briefed to the president and to the key members of the House oversight committees and the Senate oversight committees. So what you have with the UFO issue is something that Eisenhower warned about that's gone completely off the rails, that is a completely illegal operation, and which the president does not control, nor does anyone in the Congress. This means that you basically have this fourth branch of government. You have your executive branch with the president, you have your legislative branch with Congress, and you have your judicial branch headed by the Supreme Court. Well, there's this fourth element, let's call it. This fourth element pretty much does what it damn well wants, and if you get in their way, you're lucky if they don't just flat out kill you. So after I had put all this stuff together, a good friend of the president of Clinton's came to my house and said, look, they're very supportive of what you're recommending, but they're concerned that if the president pushes on this issue too much, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy. And I started laughing. I mean, I literally laughed out loud at the table with my children. And this man said, no, we're not kidding. And I couldn't believe he wasn't joking. And I said, well, Kevin, we need to talk about this some other time, not around the children. And so what I learned is that the fear is really palpable, because even if they had the courage to do it, you know, there are these other things that would be set loose if they started moving in that direction. So there are an enormous number of problems with, let's call it, the authority figures that the people look to, and I think they shouldn't be looking to them for disclosure. What I have said since 2001 is that we, the people, are going to do disclosure. We're going to ask that there be support from the government and Congress, and that's fine. But the likelihood they're going to do anything is the likelihood of a snowball surviving in hell for more than a nanosecond, because they're simply not in a position to get access and control the projects they would like to disclose. And that scares the hell out of them, frankly. The fear is palpable. So this begins to raise the question, how is this going to happen? I said, well, it's going to happen by exactly what we're doing. We, the people, need to network to other people who've been at Lockheed Skunk Works that make all the super-secret UFO-type anti-gravity devices with their underground base called the Cube near Edwards Air Force Base. There, I named it for you. And the folks who are the contractors out at the Dugway Proving Grounds near Provo, and the people who are underground in the facilities near the Nellis Range, and Alice Springs in Australia, and people who have worked in some of these compartments in the Pentagon and the CIA. I mean, there are people there, and get them to come out in a second wave of mass disclosure by the people doing it. Now, would at some point there be, if enough people did that, would there be an impetus to where even the New York Times and the Washington Post and the other outlets that always ridicule this subject would have to take it seriously? Perhaps. And at that point, you might get official endorsement of this from people like the president and senior members of the Senate and House and what have you. But I think that for them to do it without there being that kind of massive groundswell of public pressure and, frankly, disclosure of further and further detailed information that's corroborated, not, you know, one person telling a great story, but multiple people come forward who corroborate it, preferably with evidence, documents, photos, the material if they can. And that's actually what we've been calling for. Now, a lot of people are scared to death to do that. I mean, I know the first meeting we had in California at Asilomar near Monterey in 1995 of these disclosure witnesses, the fear was palpable. In 97, when we were getting ready to do briefings for Congress, there was more fear palpable. There were more witnesses. There were more of these military people coming forward. And what we found, however, is that if you get them, a bunch of them together like we did, and this is what we pioneered, then they feel safer because they're not doing it as lone wolves. They're doing it as people working with other people who understand that they're doing it patriotically, because the operations keeping this information secret are themselves unconstitutional, illegal, and are destroying everything that America stands for. And so that is what has to be explained to people in those projects and organize them to come forward. So that is what we have done, and that's what we've been working on. Now, of course, that needs to happen, and I think what I've called for in my 2015 New Year's message is for this to happen and to get quickened. And so anyone who is one of these military or contractor government witnesses should contact us. There's a place at our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, for witnesses to write in. Now, we're not interested in secondhand, thirdhand. We're not interested in people who can't have some corroboration of what they would be saying. at least a DD-214 or something to show they were in the military or employed by some contractor at the time that they saw what they saw. So, we have to vet them. But that's what we did with our initial 110. If you go to our website, by the way, SeriousDisclosure.com, we've got more than 6 of these witnesses up on our website. Anyone can see for free. Just go there and look at it. But we need to have more of that. Now, if enough of that happened, John, then you might see something. But I do not think that people need to understand how this has happened and the backstory of disclosure, because this is not known by the public very well. And I'm actually going to do a whole afternoon seminar in Washington, probably in March, and people can sign up to come to it if they want. Our website has a free newsletter. We have no advertising on the site, and you can get this for free. Just put your email address in, SIRIUS disclosure.com. And what I'm planning to do is go through an entire background of how Disclosure Project got launched and what really happened behind the scenes, because it's an amazing story. Now, you can just get from the few highlights I've shared. And I think that people need to understand that, because they need to understand that it's not as if we didn't get hundreds of thousands of people to fax and write to their members of Congress in 2001, well, before 9/11 happened, and that we didn't have direct information going to the president and the CIA director and these key people. And by the way, this project, the Disclosure Project, is the only project that's ever actually done direct meetings with people at that level of government. And in fact, last year I met with 120 world leaders on an island off the coast of Australia discussing these issues. But getting people to stick their necks out when they kind of realize that, oh my God, I'm going to be exposed as the emperor that has no clothes. I mean, I don't care if you're the Minister of Defense of Australia or the President of the United States. And this is what Eisenhower was warning us about when he said the secrecy of the military-industrial complex was becoming so complicated back in 1961 when he left office. And that President Eisenhower said this is becoming a threat to our way of life and our democracy. And he was right. He was 100% right.
Something you mentioned a little while ago literally is a good transition to what we're going to go into next. And literally, you took it out of my brain. The fact that the government, we shouldn't be holding our breath for POTUS to make an announcement that we've been visited, but rather we have to take it into our own hands. The reason why I mentioned you as a pioneer when I introduced you is because you were talking about consciousness well before any of the other researchers were. And I'd like to say that I'm very proud to see that a lot of people have finally picked up on the realization and the importance of consciousness, such as, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, 6 Man on the Moon, Paula Harris, even Grant Cameron and Colin Andrews now focus on consciousness. And right. you can't separate science and consciousness / spirituality, because that is the missing link. And this is what the segue that I was going to take it to. You produce events where you're teaching people the protocols for CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, human-initiated contact. And you are creating ambassadors around the world to hold these global events so we can take it upon ourselves. And I would love for you to discuss about the progress on the CE5, because clearly a lot more people than last year and the year before. It's just exponential, the growth of the amount of people. And so I would love the listeners to know how they can get involved with CE5 and what the next event is going to be. And I know of one that we're going to speak about coming here in California, Southern California, in April.
Right. Well, this is really exactly what I was going to talk about next, and that is the other part of disclosure is mass contact. Now, everyone says, why don't the ETs just land on the White House lawn? That's what Larry King asked me. And I laughed, no, it doesn't happen that way. They're gauging to what extent humans on this planet are ready for peaceful contact. They're not going to push beyond the point of readiness and the level of consciousness of the people on this planet, because if they were to do that, it would be an act of, if you will, psychological violence. It would be too traumatic. So what we have to do is to educate ourselves about these civilizations, what it is to be an interstellar civilization. And what does that mean? Well, in 1990, I founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, for the purpose of training people to do what happened, well, basically to learn to do what I experimented with as a teenager, and that is going into deep consciousness and the samadhi state, being able to remote view these extraterrestrial civilizations, connect to their communication devices and their own consciousness, because their communication systems, instead of hooking to cell phone towers, are linked to thought. So if they want to turn something on, they think to it. So it's at the speed of thought, not the speed of light. Why? Because if you're going from one star system to the other and communicating from one star system to another, if you're a million light years away, it takes a million years for the signal to get there. So you know that it's got to be beyond the dimension of space and time, okay, the 3 and 4D sector. You're going to have to go into 5D and 6D and 12D and 50D. Meaning these states of consciousness and higher states of consciousness. And anyone who actually knows and looks at the astrophysics, frankly, scientifically, of what it would take to become an interstellar civilization, and those are the ones we're talking about being here, know that you would have to have mastered not only going beyond linear space and time transdimensionally, but also communicating that way. Well, guess what? We may not have devices that advanced. I mean, most people are happy to have an iPhone or smartphone, but which is really a piece of junk, frankly. But they know that we have our minds. They know that we're sentient and conscious, and so we can become aware of awareness itself. We can be mindfulness of just the mind, and in that state, go very deep, and then open up to where they are and to other dimensions and other points in space. 1,000 light years from here, 1,000,000 light years from here, 1,000,000,000 light years from here. And the only limit to us doing that is our willingness to develop that capability.